Hello and welcome to Newspeak, the New Culture Forum's look at the weekly news. I'm Amy Gallagher and I'm joined today by Peter Barnes, political strategist, and Rafe Heydel-Mankoo, royal historian and senior fellow of the New Culture Forum. Today we're going to be talking about China, the Tory party conference, and whether there's any white people in Birmingham. But before we do, Rafe, we've got some local events that we want to
Yes, another great lineup of events coming up over the next few weeks. So if you are in Norwich, Bath, Newcastle, Carlisle, Halifax and Huddersfield, we have local events coming up, regular meetups. On the Oxford, in October the 28th, there's an event with Cornelia van der Pol of Restore Trust, which is trying to get rid of the woke from the National Trust. October 29th with Eric Kaufman, London North. And on October the 30th, Stephen Barrett, the great barrister, will be in Beaconsfield. November the 13th, I will be speaking in London North event as well. So do email locals at newcultureforum.org.uk, locals at newcultureforum.org.uk. You should have some of the dates at the bottom of your screen as well, and we can send you further details.
Okay. Well, Rafe, according to Keir Starmer's Labour Party, China are not a national threat to security. This is what they have told the CPS anyway, and that's of course caused the collapse of the trial of these two alleged spies spying for China. Some people are saying that this is a massive scandal, that Keir Starmer should resign, and that we're not putting the country first. How serious is this? I mean, talk us through it a little bit, but what does it say about our relationship with China?
This is a hugely serious story that isn't getting anywhere near as much attention as it should be. This is the sort of story which in the 1970s or 80s might have led to the collapse of a government. If we were talking about the Soviet Union, for example, the fact that now not even anyone's head has rolled, I'll be saying why Jonathan Powell should be one of those people who should be resigning. But essentially what happened here, we have two chaps who've been were charged with spying for China. Gross, you can't think of a greater crime to commit against the state. And the CPS wanted to go forward, the Crown Prosecution Service, with this prosecution, and then they were frustrated and thwarted at every opportunity by the government that refused to define or classify China as an enemy, which is the requirement under the Official Secrets Act for actually laying these charges of spying. Actually, it's even easier because the Official Secrets Act has now been supplanted by the National Security Act, which has the threshold as a national security threat, which is a lower threshold than even being an enemy. And yet this Prime Minister who wants to kowtow to China, we've had Rachel Reeves going to China to try to strike up business deals so desperately for economic growth, that they are deliberately ignoring the advice given to them by our security services. We had the head of MI6 saying that there are four great threats to Britain. Number one was China. We had similar things coming out from MI5. We know, of course, how strong America has been about this, and they obviously aren't going to be very happy with this. They've, obviously wanted to have ownership of TikTok because of the dangers of Chinese ownership there. But also we saw this with 5G networks, with our willingness in this country to actually allow China to build nuclear power plants over here. It seems as if we've lost all understanding of the severity of the threat from China. We're now granting them access to a huge super embassy in central London, which again, the secret services have said poses a real crisis to us in terms of intelligence. The lack of understanding of this, or the first duty of any government is to safeguard the national security of the nation. This, to me, seems like a complete dereliction of duty, particularly because you have someone like Jonathan Powell, who is a senior advisor to Starmer, was with Tony Blair from the moment he was in opposition all the way through Tony Blair's career. His fingerprints are all over Afghanistan, all over Iraq, and the sexy dossier and everything else. This is the man who approved of Peter Mandelson becoming ambassador. This is the man who actually was behind the Chagos deal, where we sold out our national interest. This man does not work for Britain's national interest. More importantly, he is up to his eyeballs in Chinese contacts. He's met with senior figures in China, senior Communist Party figures. Our secrets have now reached the fifth highest, most important person in China. This thing stinks to high heaven.
I don't understand. Is it that we don't, as you say, seem to understand the dangers that China poses? Or is that we do understand the dangers, but we just want to get these trade deals? Is that what it is?
Sorry, I think that's the key point. This isn't nuance, it's paralysis.
It's just short-termism.
We are so desperate for infrastructure, for finance, for money, and for even our green economy, which Starmer is ploughing ahead with, God knows why, is linked to China. Everything is from China, but this has been the case for quite some time. If you look at the education sector, the power grid, the data centers, everything has got Chinese fingerprints all over it. And we have allowed China in through the front door. We've rolled out the red carpet. I think we literally did when David Cameron was Prime Minister. I remember it, I was living in Manchester at the time, and they went up there and they were clearing the protests away and everything to welcome in China. And I get where the government is coming from, that they have to be careful with the language because you can't scare them away. But Rafe is exactly right. This is a dereliction of duty. This is one of the highest crimes you can ever commit. And the government has just said, don't say anything, because they are so desperate for growth or any major investment into this country that they are willing to look the other way. That is very concerning, because it's not just China we have to look at, it's other nations being able to have this level of influence. And where's the British influence in our own country at this point?
I mean, one good example of kind of the weird, I don't know, hypocrisy, if you could call it that, is Ed Miliband going to China to trying to get electric cars that we can meet net zero targets. All the while, China just doesn't care about CO2 emissions at all. And you're thinking, hang on, are you understanding what's going on here?
I thought the best thing about that, though, was sending him to China, because then he wasn't in our country causing trouble. I have to admit, the further away Ed Miliband is, the better your life is. But I do find that just hilarious to me, because why are we going to the nation that is controlling the green tech sector, begging them to do something they could quite happily do, and they're not doing it because what they're allowing to happen is the West to kind of, death by a thousand cuts. It's allowing itself to kind of sabotage so China can continue to dominate. You have to remember that Russia will invade you. China just simply repossesses you. Its control of the debt markets, its control of the finance systems around the world is unparalleled. And we've allowed that to happen. This is the key point. It's not just happened and nobody could have stopped it. Many people have been warning about this, and you are bang on about Jonathan Powell. That guy stinks to high heaven. His fingerprints are all over everything that is anti-British. People fuss over Lord Hermer. He's not the worst one by any stretch. Powell is a big problem. And the minute he was brought in as National Security Advisor, I was like, right, okay, maybe start looking for somewhere else to live.
I don't know if either of you remember, there was a Labour MP a couple of years ago on LBC with Ian Dow, and Ian Dow was really pressing him to condemn China's human rights abuses, and he absolutely would not do it, and it kind of went viral, and this was sort of at the height of wokeness, and everybody was virtue signalling about rights, and then you had this Labour MP who would not talk about China, and it was so bizarre, and now you're kind of seeing what's going on behind the scenes, and you're realising the influence that China's having, and we don't, as you say, Rafe, we don't often talk about it, because I guess it's not in our faces as much, is it, in the way that kind of mass immigration or other threats to our
It's because it's not physical violence.
Yes.
It's because it's not things blowing up. This is the stealth takeover, as it were. And I think what I think was really important as a prime example is the education sector. China invests about, realistically, £5 to £6 billion a year, 160,000 students. If China pulled that, there would be no university sector in the UK, realistically. I mean, it's hanging on by a thread as it is. So, that goes, we've got a big problem.
I mean, you ask most people in this country, what is the biggest threat to Europe? They will say Russia. Now, Russia is an absolutely grotesque power and a huge threat. But this is just the point. The Chinese have done it so skillfully. The biggest mistake was Bill Clinton allowing China into the World WTO. That's what really boosted them up. But if you look at how they have infiltrated our universities with these Confucius institutes, which are supposed to be these benign institutions just there for cultural connectivity, these are the people behind all the espionage in universities. There are reasons that universities are so woke and they're so unwilling to criticize Islam as well, because the Qataris are investing billions, the Chinese are investing huge amounts. So suddenly these universities, which used to be places which would call out oppression, will not criticize Islam, will not criticize the Middle East, won't criticize China. But you have China, one of the reasons places like the Barbados became a republic is because of China. China is seeing that Britain is no longer able to attach itself to the Commonwealth as strongly as it once did. And it's going in there. It's trying to erode Britain's international standing. It's trying to disrupt disrupt the Commonwealth, get many more countries to become republics. We've seen so many actions being taken, let alone IP, intellectual property in this country. The Chinese steal all the secrets they can from Western companies and so forth. Yes, look, China is the world's second biggest economy. We have to do business with it. It's not realistic to think we can just isolate them, but that doesn't mean we have to bend over backwards and deny the reality.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because you have to remember China doesn't need spies; it's got scholarships. It's the cultural hegemony argument of we could just influence you into doing what we want you to do. And what's more annoying is there's a number of people that can see it and haven't called it out, and have been what the Soviet Union used to call the useful idiots. I mean, at this point, I think they're just idiots at this point. But we really do have to start taking China seriously. But that can't happen given the economic situation that we're in. We can't do the kind of the aggressive attack that I think it really needs, and it's only going to get worse. With AI and all the rest of this stuff, I'm very, very concerned, if I'm being honest.
It's one of those things you can't even think about it. It's too kind of it's just terrifying.
Yeah, it is.
If you really think about it.
But this is also the point. People don't think about it because of how terrifying it could possibly be.
And they've never really paid for COVID either.
Oh, no.
The lab leak and that totally destroys.
It's a prime example of their cultural
economy.
Influence. Is look at their control of the World Health Organization. It's literally in front of you, and Starmer and the Labour government are paralysed to stop it.
I mean, we talk about tariffs. I think the world should have got together collectively and imposed a COVID tariff on all exports made by China.
Yeah, definitely. Well, China was mentioned in Kemi Badenoch's speech.
Yes.
Peter, you were there at the Tory Party conference.
Me
she
and
said,
about 3 other people, and that was about it.
Apparently, this is like it was mixed reviews of her speech, but one of her lines was that while we're discussing what a woman is, China are building more and more power plants. Of course, speaking to what we're kind of just discussed, but of course, not really saying what she's going to do about that. You were there, so what was it? What was the atmosphere like? What did you make of the speech, and what did you make of the conference?
This was the first conference I've ever been to where the Tories haven't been in power. It's the first opposition conference I've ever been to, and it is a very marked difference. It doesn't have the same electric kind of feel to it because there's not as much business being done. The difference between most other political conferences and the Tory one is it's a business conference. A lot of companies go, a lot of directors and all the rest of it. And it's much more of a kind of formal event. But I will say it was very quiet, undeniably, but not unsurprisingly. I don't understand why people think it should have been the busiest event of the year. I mean, they got their rather backsides handed to them last year, so of course it was going to be quiet. But I do think there were some marked tone changes from the Tories from before. I have to admit that, I thought Kemi came out pretty strong. I thought she had a good conference, despite Robert Jenrick, I have to admit. But also, I think the media have kind of stoked this Jenrick versus Kemi battle for the kind of views and the continued downfall of the Tories. I mean, they don't need any help. They're very good at it themselves. But I have to admit, this was a different kind of conference. Her speech, I thought, was top form. She delivered it well. The pressure on that speech was undeniable. This was I've been calling it a Kemi's conference all out. Yes. I mean, if she hadn't have performed, there was no undeniable fact that she had to go. I think she's done enough to at least stay on, even probably for another year. But I will say that, things like the stamp duty has gone down, I think, well. But what's marked difference between every other political conference this year is the Tories are coming with packages. They're not just having these kind of silver bullet kind of, this is the big headline. It's, we might have a big policy, but it's backed up by lots of other things. It's a lot of technical changes. It's a very Rishi Sunak kind of way of looking at a problem. And it's probably because Kemi, again, an engineer, the way that people look at things. But, I do think there's a lot of good has come out of this conference. But, the credibility problem's still there. The popularity problem obviously is still there, and I think Kemi's still an unknown. But I think the fact that I don't think it could get any worse is still in her favour.
Yeah, the two big policy announcements, Rafe, were really leaving the ECHR and abolition of stamp duty, wasn't it? Yeah. And this abolition of stamp duty, it was like the crescendo of the speech and of the conference, which I thought it was, to me, I think it's a good policy. I mean, it really, stamp duty is really stopping people from buying and selling houses. And obviously, I thought she could have made a joke about Angela Rayner, actually.
Yes, you were the first person I know that
She
said
could have
that.
said, even Angela Rayner can't afford the
one
stamp duty.
policy that's not really got any kind of highlight, and I think it should have, was the abolition of business rates.
Right.
I thought that one should have got significantly more, given the fact that COVID and the budget for growth, I use air quotes, has decimated small and medium-sized industries and enterprises. I think that was a much bigger policy, in my opinion, than the stamp duty.
To me, what was missing, though, was just any kind of, understanding of what we're facing as a country, that there was these kind of policies here and there, which they're not bad, but I didn't get a sense that she understands, the kind of existential crisis.
Well, it's because every time that they talk about that, people will remember that you're the ones that got us into that position. And I remain convinced. I love Robert Jenrick's videos, very slick, very impressive. But each time he does that, I think support for the Reform Party probably increases because it just serves to remind. And I think Kemi Badenoch understands that full well. And so the only platform, they can't go on immigration, they can't go on anything to do with integration or crime and so forth. So it's the economy is the only platform upon which they see that they have a route, not to winning power. I mean, there's no chance of they're getting power, but at least to retaining their seats or maybe building on those seats. Because if you still look at polling today, remarkably, the Tories are still more trusted on the economy than their opponents are. Everybody in the Westminster bubble thinks that the Liz Truss days, I won't say the Liz Truss years, the Liz Truss days,
Hours at this point.
forever dented reputation. But most people aren't that interested in politics. Most people have forgotten about Liz Truss, or they regarded that as an aberration. But we mustn't overplay the Tories' hand here. They're not head and shoulders above the opposition. So yes, they are the most trusted on the economy, only by a slim margin. That's why you saw Kemi doing what she did. I thought it was impressive enough. Then again, she waited so long to come up with these policies, I don't think she expected reform to rise quite so rapidly and dramatically. Yes, I'm all for people as an academic taking a long time to come up with policies. But everything she announced today, I mean, you could have come up with that in about a month or two. I've come up with some of these policies myself. I mean, you don't need to actually have the full-fledged thing there. You could have come out earlier and then fleshed them out today. And I think you've had a whole, year or whatever, of nothing happening. The road's been left open completely for the Reform Party. And now, of course, she's sort of treading water.
See, I would say on this, though, that in a way, I think what Kemi's done is given Reform enough rope to hang themselves because they haven't done the thinking bit. They've come out with the soundbite. They've come out with the flashy headline. But when pressed, even now, they can't fill in the gaps. I look at some of the interviews that Nigel Farage has given. I look at the Laura Kunsberg one, where he was asked about the water companies. He had no clue on what reform would actually do. And the other factor, I also think, is they had no clue how they're going to do a lot of the things they want to do. What Kemi has done, I think, is not only told us what she wants to do, there is at least a vague idea of how they're going to do it. It's not there quite, but I do think that's really important. It's one bit our politics has to change into. It's not just what are you going to do, it's how are you going to do it. And for too long, our politics is always give me something. And we need to kind of change the public's perception and questioning of our politicians to kind of save us more than anything.
That's all very sensible, but that's not how politics works,
yes,
right?
Agreed.
The reason that Reform and Farage are ahead in the polls is precisely because they're giving the public what they want.
Yeah.
And look, a lot of the policies that they've come up with, the indefinite leave to remain and various other ones, and leaving the UNHCR convention, that's all stuff that I've come up with as well. That you can put in the detail after the fact, but we know the destination is there. The people need to know the destination. There are clearly ways you can achieve that destination, but it's giving people that hope and optimism and building upon that. And I think the polls just show quite clearly that is a more of a winning success. Even though in an ideal world, yes, we would go down the path.
So this goes back to the central point of what's more important: winning or fixing things. Unfortunately, for my opinion of reform, is just charge ahead and we'll fix it later. We've tried that for the last 30 years. It's not gone so great. I think it's the main reason we're in a lot of our trouble is we don't think before we act. Kemi has also had the big problem of a divided party. Over the things like the ECHR, there was a good number of Tory MPs that had it as a red line. They said, if you have this as a policy, we're out. That was a real difficult moment for Kemi, and what she's been able to do. It's not just have we're leaving kind of moment. She's come at them with a 200-page document saying, this is why you're wrong. And I think this is really important to get the kind of the soft Tory vote back. Sorry, what's now the soft reform vote back, because that centre-right ground, I still think reform, if they're not careful, will lose a lot of it with hard rhetoric over immigration.
But there's still 4 years to go to the
Still
next
4 years,
election,
yes,
so that's
of
a
course.
difference. And
Yeah.
of course, in terms of what you're talking about, absolutely, in terms of, say, for example, Boris Johnson, I would pull my hair out as he would make outlandish claim after outlandish claim. I always remember Jean Chrétien, the Prime Minister of Canada, hugely popular. He said, it's because I always undersold everything. I always kept people's expectations low and over-delivered, unlike Boris Johnson, who would make promises that he could never deliver. And to me, it's such a stupid short-term policy. But I have full hope and faith that over the next 4 years, the Reform Party has professionalised hugely compared to how they were. The Reform Party is in a completely different league and scale to how they have been before. They do have great policy wonks also advising them. So I have much more confidence in
the sad reality for the Tories is that they're now kind of in a position with the Liberal Democrats, aren't they, for third position? So they're in this. I mean, people are very critical of Kemi, but she's in such a difficult position. She's got 14 years of Tory disappointment. She's got this position now with Reform ahead of the polls. She's got to kind of try and keep some of the voters from going to Reform, but she also doesn't want. She wants to take some from Lib Dems as well. So she's got to come up with this kind of wishy-washy kind of trying to please everyone, which is never going to appeal to people's hearts.
This is the kind of, she could get the minds, but she might not get to the hearts. And I think that's going to be a big problem. But I will say, I think the Reform have a very similar problem with a fractured base. Do you know, Nigel Farage is holding a lot of the Reform base together with very tight grip. Given the fact you've got kind of the Advance UK lot, you've got Restore Britain, you've got lots of factioning is forming, and a lot of people are saying, well, wait a minute, you're promising this to this group, that to that group, that to that group, and we're not getting any solid, cohesive policy ideas. And we're 4 years away, but, when you have situations like Tommy Robinson or you have situations with Rupert Lowe, those are causing kind of nuclear moments within the base, and too many of those starts to look like a party that's not harmonious with itself.
Well, one person who will be a bit disappointed that Kemi's kind of performed quite well, I guess, might be Robert Jenrick, who's kind of, many of us think that he's kind of waiting in the wings to be leader. He came out recently, gave a speech talking about Birmingham. I think it's Handsworth in Birmingham, where he was talking about the impact of mass immigration and how there are certain parts of Birmingham, obviously the second largest city in the country, where there's pretty much no white faces. He said it looks like a slum, and people haven't integrated at all. And there's lots of footage online of, just walking through the streets and just loads of people wearing burqas and it just looking like a foreign country. He's sort of come under fire for saying that. I don't really see how you can disagree with him. I think it's just the fact that he's pointing it out, isn't he? It's like you're not allowed to point it out. And it does make me think that, one of the reasons people voted for Kemi was that because she was a black woman, she could say things like there's no white faces, and she wouldn't be branded a racist, and she could talk about these issues because in a way that, maybe a white man wouldn't be able to in the press. That doesn't seem to have happened. It seems very much like Jenrick is the bad cop to Kemi. What do people make of his comments? And it's more the reaction to them, isn't it? That's that's interesting.
For me, I think we have to tread very carefully, even now when we talk about race politics and the influence of race in our politics. I think people are overestimating this kind of the end of woke and how far the Overton window has shifted. I still think there is a big section of this country that doesn't like the narrative that was being made by Jenrick, and I think they felt very uncomfortable with it. I think that's the point. And you're right, the reaction to it has been obscene, but of course it has been, because yet again you're not allowed to say the certain things that he said. I don't think he's wrong in anything that he said, but I do think that, again, it is what you were saying. You were in charge of this. You didn't do anything about it for a very long time. It's only got worse. You can't really kind of not take accountability for it. And I think that's the big thing when it comes to Jenrick on a lot of this stuff. But, when you don't even have people with a standard of English, for example, communication, you can't talk to other people. Integration is impossible. And yet people just kind of use that word as a kind of, well, it's about integration. Great. How are you going to integrate communities? But it's just a nonsense, most of it. But Jenrick is right.
Apparently there's parts of Handsworth in Birmingham where less than 10% of the people living there are white. And even those that are white are not necessarily white British. They might be immigrants from other countries. Rafe, what do you think it's premature to be kind of for politicians like Jenrick to be openly talking about demographic change in this way?
Premature. It's about 15 years too
I know.
late. This is the problem. And what amazes me is the sheer audacity, the hypocrisy of all those attacking Jenrick. These are the same people saying the countryside is too white.
Yes.
These are the same people, you know, that chap from the BBC that was Sri Lankan or whatever he was, who said, going into the BBC, I felt uncomfortable with so many white faces. Somehow that's perfectly acceptable. Look, the reality is, you could say, one thing against Jenrick here is that there's a reason that these areas are so unwhite. It's because there's white flight. People are leaving. There's a reason that house prices in the southwest of England are going through the roof, because people are leaving the cities, because they see people living at the coalface or the dark side of diversity. And all of the sociological evidence, all the economic evidence shows the more ethnic diversity you have in an area, the more social trust declines. Social trust is the key indicator of happiness and economic success and prosperity. People become more introverted, they stay at home, they vote less, they volunteer less. You begin to see local neighbourhoods and communities deteriorate because nobody's investing in them. It's a recipe for disaster. You know, there are parts of this country, the north of England, in the Midlands, where the population is so highly ethnic that there are Asian pupils who think that Britain is a majority Asian country because they don't see anything else. They live in these segregated communities, they have their own satellite TV channels, their own shops, their own places of worship, their daily lives pass with little or no interaction with wider society. And as a result of that, these communities become the breeding grounds for cultural practices that are frankly abhorrent to our civilized way of life. We know that Muslims, for example, who live in these areas are twice as likely to have sympathy for terrorist attacks, for example. You see the rise in honour killings, child marriage, cousin marriage, acid attacks, the anti-Semitism, homophobia, the list goes on. Ed Hussein, in his book Among the Mosques, spoke about these areas where white men are not welcome to come. We know that the police have to often contact community leaders for permission to go into these areas. The idea that these are lovely areas is a nonsense. And you even had Sarah Khan, who was the former government person responsible for integration or hate crimes or whatever the hell she was doing, come out and attacking Jenrick for stating the obvious. I mean, it's about time more people were brave enough to actually say what he said.
It's a good point about, all that woke stuff about the countryside being, too white, because the claim was that the countryside was just racist because there was too many white people. And you think now that we do have places where the ethnic minority is white people, is there any discussion about how it might be for those people, that they might feel that it's, that they're experiencing hostility, that they might feel like a minority? There's absolutely no, like the idea of being a minority totally goes out the window, doesn't it, when it's white people?
The fundamental problem has always been when we allowed the narrative that any kind of disparage was because of bigotry, that any kind of cultural difference was because one group had dominated over another. Once we allowed that to kind of take root, everything else was going to collapse. And Rafe, you're bang on that, these areas are parallel worlds within our own country and they have their own practices. The idea that the police have to contact a community leader, a nonsense phrase, by the way, to even enter, to have anything to do with it, to calm tensions down, is wrong on every level, every single level. It shows the two-tier society. It's evident to see. So, like you said, more people need to be brave enough to start coming out and saying these things, but also you then need to back it up with how you're going to fix it. What are you going to do? How hard are you going to come down and actually break up the control of these communities within their own community? And I think that's a big question, and I'm not really hearing a lot of answers.
And the most ridiculous thing of all I've heard in the last few days after Jenrick is you get these, these nincompoop race grifters like Lorinda Kaur and these contemptible, I have no words for these cantankerous old creatures like, what's her name, Yasmin Alibaya Brown, saying, oh, well, I was just in Hampstead, it's so white there, there's a big problem with integration here. and they're in the course saying, well, why should brown people have to make all the effort? Surely white people should make the effort. I'm sorry, nobody asked for these people to come into their neighbourhoods and their areas. This is a majority white country. It's not up to the indigenous majority population to make concessions. You don't join a club and then try to change the rules of that club once you become a member of it.
The onus is on us to integrate to the new culture.
Yes.
Well, that seems to have what's happened, though, isn't it? That, you know, somehow we've got to continue to bend and to give up and to kind of be quiet about it as well. And more importantly, what a lot of it has happened is you speak up, you get branded, and you are out of society. It's not that, you know, you get physically attacked or anything like that. Is you are othered. You don't have to be engaged with. That's why the term far right is being used around. It is a way to push you out of the public square. And they do it very brilliantly for a long time. But I do think that is starting to break down because of these instances where people are saying, well, wait a minute, Robert Jenrick's right. And that is why they are panicking. That's why you're seeing this really hard come down by the woke left, because they know that their power is slipping and there's nothing more dangerous than a wounded animal.
Well, perhaps we need to look over to Italy, where Giorgia Meloni is banning the burqa, and think about doing some things like that. And we're going to be talking about that on our extra content for members. So if you're a member, you can join us then. But for now, thank you, Rafe. Thank you, Peter. And see you next week.